time for Sunflower Ditch as they're hanging out. That was good of them to come by. All right, so we're going to do a message today that I've been so incredibly excited to do, called Opposite Day. We've really been pumping this one for a long time and really trying to get the word around about this message coming out. And so if you haven't been able to hear what we're talking about, Opposite Day is based around the concept of, because of past pains, people will behave the opposite way that their natural nature would be, or that really the desires of their heart would lead them to go. Kind of the examples we've been using here is like, say you got a kid in like junior high, we all knew this kid, where he just talked, and he talked, and he talked, and he talked, and he always talked, and he just kept talking, and he's talking, and he's talking about the most random things, didn't matter what, he just talked all the time. And why did he talk? Because he wanted attention. He wanted somebody to be friends with him, but because he talked so much about so many random things, nobody talked to the guy. And so what happens is, he ends up with no friends. When his deepest desire is to get a friend and to get somebody to talk to, but because of some fear or some pain or something, he's afraid that nobody will look at him, so he just talks to everybody all the time. Another example we've been talking about is the people that, you know, they're in the gym and they're cut and they're always in there, they've got those perfect bodies, they always eat the right things, and everybody's like, man, they've got it, they've got this perfect body, they've got everything under control, and they love their body and everything's cool. And if you really get deep down in the psyche of that person, the reason they're in the gym all the time, the reason they push that hard, is because there are parts about their body that they hate. And so that's why they're constantly pushing. There's also the people that are incredibly quiet. We've all been to parties where there's that one person sitting in a corner and he's just not talking at all. And so everybody goes, okay, well, he's just antisocial. Okay, that's got to be his thing. But most of the time, that person is desperate for somebody to come talk to him. But for some reason, they feel like they don't have something valuable to say. So they just don't talk at all, so no one talks to them. But of course, there's a person that, you know, is the life of the party. They're talking all the time. Everybody wants to be around them. They're the happiest person. They're always telling the jokes, everything's great, and they're surrounded by people all the time. But even though they're surrounded by people and everybody thinks, man, they got it going on, they can be surrounded by people and feel incredibly alone because they're feeling like they have to perform all the time. And so since they've got to be the loudest, they've got to tell all the jokes, they've got to be the life of the party, they don't intimately connect with anybody. And the common denominator for all of these is shame. Because of shame, we end up behaving the opposite way of what our true desires of our heart are. And these go to very little minor things to really deep, dark stuff. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today, is how do we get rid of this shame? Because this was something that was incredibly relevant to me when I felt like God had revealed this to me. I was like, man, this really hits home with me. So I'm kind of doing business with God, and I'm going, okay, God, how do I get rid of the shame? How do we remove the shame? How do we start to heal from shame? How do we get rid of the shame in our lives? And I'm getting frustrated. I'm like, I gotta figure out the answer. I gotta figure this out. There's gotta be a quick fix. There's gotta be like that perfect scripture. There's gotta be a switch to flip. There's gotta be something that I can do that can fix the shame, that can free us from the shame, that can heal us from shame. And I'm outside in the middle of the night, and there's nothing but moonlight, and I'm just screaming it like, what's the answer? There's gotta be an answer. There's gotta be an answer. And what I felt like God gave me was that there is no quick fix to heal from shame. There is no magic scripture. There is no switch to flip. The way you free yourself from shame is every day you spend a little time with God. And I was not happy with this answer. I was going, wait a minute. So there's no switch, there's no magic scripture, there's nothing that I can just snap my fingers and I can fix this and I can begin to heal. Now there's obviously things that we can do, because if we've got an event in our lives or something's happened to us or somebody's done something or we've done something, obviously if we can speak to somebody about that, not just the random goobers that we can find, but the real people, the wise people, the people God's put in our lives to be able to speak to, then we can get those things out. Because the problem is when we have these events happen to us and when we've done these things and these things have been done to us, we start to feel like we're the only ones. And almost every time when we can go speak to the right people about this, they'll always look at us and go, is that it? Because that's where the real fear and that's where the real shame starts to come from, is that we feel very alone in it. And then we can start to speak to other people about it and we can begin to be freed of it. But if we truly want to heal completely from shame, the only way to go about it is to every day spend time with God. And I'm going, there's got to be a better way than this. I was furious. I was like, there's got to be an answer here. And I felt like God said, hey, think about it. If you were to spend every day with me and then look at your life after 5 years, it's going to blow your mind where you are. Oh, how did I get here? But if we're going to spend every day with God, and we're going to spend time with God every day, we've got to constantly surround ourselves with messages of value and encouragement and grace and things that are lifting us up, because if we're in this place of shame, our focus is on the shame. And so when we're trying to hear from God, what we're going to be hearing is not God. It's going to be something very condemning. It's going to be something that pushes us down, because that's where our focus is. So we've got to constantly be surrounding ourselves with the right kind of messages and taking in the right kind of things. I want to do real quick this piece of scripture that Paul talks about in Romans, where he says, so you have not received a spirit that makes you fearful slaves. Instead, you've received God's Spirit when he adopted you as his children. Now we call him Abba, Father. Now the translation of Abba is beloved Father. It's like saying daddy. So Paul's saying we can call God Daddy. And for most of my life, that freaked me out. That just felt really unnatural to me. I'm going, wait, I can call God Daddy? That just feels weird. And I keep looking at the scripture and going, wait a minute, what is the deal? We can do this? We can actually call God Daddy? So I want to kind of explain it a little bit. Because this goes to Jesus, and Jesus had his own opposite day. See, Jesus, he was always calm, cool, collected. He was kind of always in control. You know, he's asleep in the back of a boat. Boat starts rocking. The disciples start freaking out. They're going, Jesus, help us, man. He got wake up. And he gets up and he's like, it's cool, baby. Wind, rain, go away. What are y'all worrying about? It's all good. And that's not exactly how it goes down, but that's the general gist of it, you know? People are trying to kill Jesus all the time, and he's like, oh, they're going to come kill me. Let's just go. Let's do this thing. He's in control. Even when he's hitting people with ropes and stuff, like he knew who he was. He was very deliberate about it. He was always in control, and he always called God Father. He could always call God Daddy. He was always very intimately connected with God, and he's always in control. Now all of a sudden, Jesus is about to go to the cross. We fast forward a little bit, and he's having the Passover celebration with his disciples. They're breaking bread, they're drinking wine, and they're going to have the first communion. And then Jesus says this to his disciples. He says, my peace I leave with you. Okay? And as soon as he said that, all of the sin of mankind starts to be gathered up and put on Jesus. And so the guy who had always been calm, cool, collected, in control, now all of a sudden he starts feeling the effects of all that sin. And that's what happens, is it starts to attack your heart. And so now Jesus, who'd always been very cool, starts to feel anguish, and he starts to feel pain, and he starts to feel shame. And then he goes outside, and he's in the garden, and he's worrying, and he's down on his knees, and he's on his face, and he's crying, and he's freaking out, and he's getting very, very scared. And sin is pouring on him, and pouring on him, and it's working on his heart, and he's feeling more anguish, and more pain, and more shame. And he's getting pushed and pushed and pushed to the point where he's sweating blood, because more and more sin's coming on, and he's feeling more and more shame. And so then the guards come to him, and they grab him, and they start making fun of him, and they start spitting on him, and they start hitting him, and more shame's pouring on him, and more sin's pouring on him. And then they grab him, and they take him, and they start beating him, and then more sin's pouring on him. And then they take him, and he's got to carry the cross up the mountain, and more sin's being poured on him. And then he's all on the top of the mountain, and they put him on the cross, and they hoist him up, and more sin's pouring on him, more sin's pouring on him. Where Isaiah said that he had so much anguish and so much pain and so much sin and so much shame put on him that he was so deformed he couldn't even be recognized as a human anymore. He had so much pain. And so he's up on the cross, and the Jesus who had always called God Daddy and was always in control says, at noon, darkness fell across the whole land until 3 o'clock. Then at 3 o'clock, Jesus called out in a loud voice some words, which means, my God, why have you abandoned me? This is very important here because Jesus always called God Daddy. He always called him Father. And Jesus, who's been pushed and feeling all the shame and feeling all the condemnation and feeling all the pain that everyone had ever felt because of their sin, is now being put on him. And he's being pushed and he's being pushed and he's being pushed to the point where the guy that was so connected with God, he could call him Daddy, now calls him God. And is no longer has that intimate connection and screams, my God, why have you abandoned me? And he's being pushed, and he's being pushed, and he's being pushed. And then as soon as he says, God, why have you abandoned me? He's pushed to the full extent that a human can be pushed. He says, it is finished, and he dies. And what Jesus did was he turned the tables. Because when we feel all the shame, when we feel all the condemnation, and we feel all that pain, we start to feel, my God, why have you abandoned me? And Jesus changed it so that the guy who always screamed, Daddy, Daddy, how could you love me? Screamed, my God, why have you abandoned me? So that we could cry, Daddy, how could you love me this much? He switched the tables. And that's why Paul can say that you have not received a spirit that makes you fearful slaves. Instead, you've received God's spirit when he adopted you as his own children. Now you can call him Abba, Daddy. See, you need a connection with God. But if you want to free yourself from shame, you need an intimate connection with Daddy. You've got to understand that when you wake up in the morning, Jesus has already taken all the sin and the pain and the shame away. And if we can lay that on Jesus and have an experience like that every day, all of a sudden we can start to be freed from the shame, and it's all going to eventually wash away if we can be focused on God every day. Now, I want to do a really quick exercise, real fast. Now, the first time somebody told me to do this, I was like, what in the world are you talking about? But it actually turned out to be really, really powerful. So I'm going to do this with y'all. But if everybody will just close their eyes real quick. And I want you guys to imagine that Jesus is sitting next to you or standing next to you. All his glory, the shining face, the white robe. And he's very, very pleased with you. I just want you to imagine Jesus there with you, very, very pleased with who you are. And then I want you to imagine that same Jesus within you, still shining, and still very, very pleased with who you are.
Alright, so...
And if we can have experiences like that on a daily basis, we can start to be freed from shame. That's what God intended. That's why Jesus went to the cross, was to take the shame away from us. He felt shame so that we wouldn't have to feel shame anymore. So let's celebrate this with